চেক বলে দিই, ইউটিউবে স্ট্রিমিংটা হচ্ছে, হ্যাঁ? মানে জাস্ট এনিওয়ান ক্যান চেক।
ওকে, হ্যাঁ আমি দেখলাম, আমি এইমাত্র খুলেছিলাম ইউটিউবটা, আমি দেখলাম জাস্ট।
চেক বলে দিই, ইউটিউবে স্ট্রিমিংটা হচ্ছে,
হ্যাঁ বলো কপিল।
জাস্ট এনিওয়ান ক্যান চেক।
ওকে, হ্যাঁ আমি দেখলাম, আমি এইমাত্র খুলেছিলাম ইউটিউবটা, আমি দেখলাম জাস্ট।
চেক বলে দিই,
হ্যালো ম্যাম, গুড আফটারনুন। ম্যাম মিউটেড, ম্যাম can't hear you. You are muted, ma'am.
So good to see you.
Yes, after a long time, ma'am.
আচ্ছা ত্রয়ী, যদি আমার পিপিটি না হয়
ওকে,
আমি সাথে সাথে তোমাকে পাঠাবো,
আচ্ছা
আর যদি আমি পেরে যাই তো হয়ে গেল।
ওকে ম্যাম।
এত টেকনোলজি।
So it is good to see you after a long time, ma'am.
Good to see you too. After how many years?
After how many years? Yes, at least 3 years.
তো মনে হচ্ছে 3 বছর তো হবেই।
Exactly.
So should we start at 12 naki?
Yes. Now I will start. Okay.
তুমি তাহলে রেকর্ডিং যদি করো আগে থেকে অ্যানাউন্স করে দিও যাতে
হ্যাঁ রেকর্ডিং হচ্ছে, রেকর্ডিং হবে। ওকে,
আচ্ছা ওগুলো আমি একটু সবে শিখেছি আইপিপিএল থেকে।
ওকে। A very good afternoon to all of you. I take this opportunity to welcome you all in this online lecture series organized by the Department of Women's Studies, Diamond Harbour Women's University. And today we are extremely delighted to welcome Professor Sangjukta Dasgupta, the speaker of the first lecture. And without further ado, I would like to request Professor Moitrey Bardhan Rai, our senior most faculty of the department, to introduce the speaker. Ma'am, you are muted. Ma'am, you are muted. We can't hear you, ma'am. Ma'am, we can't hear you. Ma'am, we can't hear you, ma'am. Ma'am, we can't hear you.
Oh no.
Mute হয়ে গেছেন. Mute হয়ে গেছেন.
Please call her.
Yes, I will. So ma'am will rejoin and then try, because she is not able to unmute herself. Okay, so we will try if there is any problem. So I will request, in that case, shall I request Taniyadi?
Hello, ma'am. Hello, Troy.
Hello, Taniyadi.
I've logged in from 2 of my accounts.
Okay.
Because one of the desktop doesn't have a mic, but this one has such a bad angle.
Okay. So, ma'am, can you hear us? Oh, I think there is a technical problem for which ma'am is not able to unmute herself.
Troy,
Is it?
I think
Yes.
you should call her and tell her that the icon that looks like a mic, she
Yes.
has to click on top of that.
Okay.
Because it's showing. There should not be a problem.
Actually, ma'am is trying. I called her up and she told me that she was trying, but it's not happening.
No, she has to identify the icon and then tap on it.
Okay, ma'am, I will try once more.
তো মৈত্রী দিয়েও এসছে।
মনে হচ্ছে বিসি ম্যাডাম দেখতে পাচ্ছি।
Madam, I think it is better to make an announcement that our entire program will be recorded.
Yes. Let me say something first. That is, our program is being recorded, first of all. And secondly, Professor Moitrey Bardhan Rai was supposed to introduce the speaker, but due to some technical fault, I again called her up, but due to some technical fault, she is not able to unmute herself. Therefore, she has asked me to introduce the speaker by someone else. So may I take the opportunity of introducing the speaker with your permission?
Whose permission?
With ma'am, your permission.
My permission, yes, of course, go ahead. Yes,
because
of course.
Moitrey ma'am has asked me to request someone.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So So may I have the pleasure of again introducing the speaker, today's speaker, Dr. Sangjukta Dasgupta, professor and former head, Department of English, and former dean, Faculty of Arts, Calcutta University, has been the recipient of the Fulbright Postdoctoral Fellowship and Fulbright Scholar in Residence Grant, Australia-India Council Fellowship, Gender Studies Fellowship Grant, University of British Columbia, among others. She has been invited to participate in conferences and teach at universities in the USA, UK, Europe, Canada, and Australia. She was the chairperson of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize jury panel at Melbourne and Malta. The Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, invited her as visiting professor to deliver a series of talks on Tagore, nation, and gender. She was granted the Charles Wallace Trust UK Translator Fellowship to work on her project on Tagore's daughters at the University of East Anglia, UK. She was the co-principal investigator of the India-US Knowledge Initiative program, working on women entrepreneurs engaged in eco-friendly business and in this connection visited Chicago, Florida, and South California in the USA in 2016 and 17. She is the President, Executive Council of the Indian Poetry and Performance Library, ICCR, Kolkata, in 2018. Sahitya Akademi New Delhi nominated her as the convener of the English Language Board and member of the General Council. In 2018, she taught in Poland as visiting professor at the Jagiellonian University, Krakow, Poland. She received the IWSFF Women Achievers Award, Kolkata, in 2019 and the WEI Kamla Das Poetry Award in 2020. She is a member of the advisory committee of the Center for Women's Studies, North Bengal University. And ma'am has, let me tell you, there are 21 published books of ma'am, and I'm not going into that detail, but to name a few of the books, let me tell you about the novels of Huxley and Hemingway, A Study in Two Planes of Reality, Responses, Selected Essays, Snapshots, Dilemma is a poetry collection, and the latest one is She, Short Stories by Indian Women Writers, edited by Sahitya Akademi. So now I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, ma'am, Professor Anuradha Mukhopadhyay, to deliver the inaugural speech. And we are always thankful to ma'am for encouraging us, because with her initiative, we are able to organize this kind of programs. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Troy. A very good morning to all present. Our eminent invited speaker, Professor Dasgupta, our Register Dr. Saidur Rahman, our Dean of Arts, I don't know whether he's present anyway, our Dean of Students' Welfare, Dr. Tania Chakraborty, Professor Moitri Bordhon Rai, all our faculty members who are joining this webinar, and faculty of the Department of Women's Studies. This is the first of the lecture series organized by the Department of Women's Studies, Diamond Harbour Women's University. As you may know, Diamond Harbour Women's University is the first women's university in Eastern India. It's not the only anymore. We have another university, Konashri University, which has come up in West Bengal. And this Department of Women's Studies has existed as a department right from the start. This is in contrast to the case in other universities where women's studies existed or exists as a center of studies. And maybe some of them have later developed into a full-fledged department. Diamond Harbour Women's University is also the first in Eastern India to introduce a regular 2-year postgraduate MA course in the subject. Of course, initially, there were problems that we encountered It took time to build awareness among the students, especially in this region, regarding the subject. However, I'm happy with the development of this department. We now have enthusiastic, dynamic faculty members in the department, and I'm sure that the department will grow and develop with time. We are now all set to launch the PhD program in this department, in the Women's Studies Department from 2021. I'm sure that this lecture series organized by the Department of Women's Studies will be greatly beneficial to the students and also to the faculty members of our university. I welcome our eminent speaker of today, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta. In fact, I am not a student or a scholar of women's studies, but I have known her through some of the articles that I have read in the editorial of the Statesman. I read Statesman, so I've read some of her articles, yes. And I wish this event a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to request Dr. Saidur Rahman, our registrar sir, to deliver his introductory speech. Over to you, sir.
Honorable Vice Chancellor Madam, Professor Anuradha Mukhopadhyay, Dean, Faculty of Arts, Dean, Students Welfare, the Coordinator of the Department of Women's Studies, Dr. Moitri Bordhan Rai, and Joint Coordinator, Department of Women's Studies, Dr. Rohi Sinha, our Honorable Speaker, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, guests, and my dear students. First, I extend my gratitude and thanks to the organizer of this online lecture series. Bengali language, literature, and journalism attained a remarkable growth in the course of 19th century, and Bengali women made their earliest contributions in those fields. Women's contribution to Bengali literature and journalism was possible because of the literary movements in Bengal had been clearly bound up with political, social, religious, and other movements in Bengal. In the late 19th century, we find at least some limited success of the movement for social uplift of the Bengali women, and many factors were responsible for some changes in the social status of the women. As education and consciousness spread, we find a galaxy of women flourishing with their pens, and many of them depicted the picture of social atmosphere. The Bengali women writers have a great influence for social upliftment and empowerment of the women in Bengal. I hope that the students and participants will enjoy the online lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your words. Now, I would like to request Professor Topon Mondol, Dean, Faculty of Arts, to deliver his speech. To you, sir.
Thank you, Troy. A very good afternoon to all of you. The Department of Women's Studies has taken the initiative to begin this online lecture series. I heartily congratulate them. I also thank Professor Sangjukta Dasgupta, Professor of English and former Dean, Faculty of Arts, University of Calcutta, for giving consent to deliver the first lecture of this series. Our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Madam, and Registrar Sir has already shared their observation regarding this lecture. In addition to this, I would like to recall the prolonged struggle of women writers to create a space of their own in the 19th century colonial Indian denied formal education to lower caste people and women. Those who were brought up in the upper caste families were privileged to read and write at home. A survey done by William Adam at the Bengal Presidency in 1835 revealed the absence of formal female schooling. It is in this background women from Bengal like Rashu Sundari Devi tried with her heart's content to read and write and finally published Amar Jivan. So, with that note, we are looking forward to Professor Dasgupta's lecture, which will surely address the bulk of writing contributed by the Bengali women's writer in British India. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your words. And that has already prepared the ground. Okay. And now I would like to request Dr. Tania Chakraborty, Dean of Students' Welfare, to deliver her lecture.
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chancellor, the Registrar, the Dean of Arts, organizers of this lecture, faculty members of the Department of Women's Studies, faculty members of other departments of this university, and dear students. I congratulate the Department of Women's Studies for beginning this online lecture series. As Madam Vice Chancellor and the others have pointed out, most universities have centers for women's studies. Diamond Harbour Women's University has a department running a full-fledged master's course. Research will soon commence in the department too. And very recently, the department saw the addition of 3 young and enthusiastic teachers who are doing splendid. One of the ways of introducing or inducing research is by reading or hearing about topics which are roughly outside the prescribed syllabus. And the best way of doing it is by bringing in speakers of eminence from industry or academia. Here at the Department of Women's Studies, Diamond Harbour Women's University, the online lecture series could not have had a better start. Part of my enthusiasm springs from the fact that I have had the opportunity of doing my research under Professor Dasgupta. In fact, Professor Troy Sinha has also worked under her guidance. But that is not the only reason. It is just one of the reasons. Having known Professor Dasgupta since my university days, I know how profound her knowledge is regarding this area: women's studies, gender studies, feminist criticism, and the like. And when it comes to research in the Faculty of Arts, Calcutta University, Madam Dasgupta was one of the pioneers who introduced women's studies in the arts departments. Elaine Showalter viewed the literary history of British women writers, and she found that many of them, right from the times of the Bronte sisters, were hidden from the male-dominated history of canonical texts. She pointed at the fact that the whole tradition of female writing has been neglected by male critics. So her study promoted a feminist critique and, more importantly, a gyno-criticism. Professor Dasgupta's topic today is The Awakening Bengali Women Writers in British India. I guess Madam Dasgupta is now keen on attempting here in India and in Bengal what Showalter attempted in the West. Bengali women writers in British India, how many of them do we know about? How many women writers have we heard about? These women writers are also hidden from the male-dominated history of Bengali canonical texts, which we have been told are always male-authored. So I hope that this lecture, organized by the Department of Women's Studies, opens up gyno-criticism here in Bengal too. So congratulations to the department once again, and welcome, ma'am, to our university and the Department of Women's Studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Taniadi. I was also, I just recalled my days, my university days, when I used to listen to ma'am's lecture. And now I would like to request ma'am to deliver the lecture.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Anuradha Mukhopadhyay, Registrar Dr. Saidur Rahman, Professor Tapun Mondal, Dean, Faculty of Arts, Moitrey Bardhan Roy, Dr. Tanya Chakraborty, Dean of Students' Welfare, Troy Sinha, Assistant Professor, Women's Studies. Thank you all for this very kind invitation and also this opportunity for which I feel deeply honored and humbled. I'm also particularly delighted about this invitation because three of my very talented, outstanding research scholars are part of this university. They are Aparna Singh of the English department, Tanya Chakraborty, who is the Dean of Students' Welfare, and Troy Sinha, who has been my research scholar at the MPhil and PhD levels. So I am truly delighted and also enthused about the fact that, as referred to by the Vice Chancellor, in Diamond Harbour Women's University, this is not only a center, as we have in Calcutta University, but this is a department, and very soon the PhD program will be launched. So the choice of this particular topic has, my guide has been Troy, and because Troy's wish is my command, I will try to speak on the awakening, the Bengali woman writer in British India. The Bengali woman writer in British India was undoubtedly a mad woman who had made a confident bid to step out of the Andar Mahal. Women's education, women's ability to read and write and then publish their writing in the vernacular languages and sometimes in English were considered serious subversive acts in the socio-cultural scenario of the 19th century and early 20th century, that is the colonial period. Caste, class, religion, institutionalized education, self-taught skills were all a part of the experience of being a woman reader and a woman writer in British India. Therefore, whether a woman was nurtured in a family that adhered to the relatively progressive environment promulgated by the Brahmo Samaj or the Christian Church, or whether she belonged to a conservative, middle-class Hindu or Muslim household, determined her choices or lack of choices in a rigorously regimented patriarchal system. In such a severe phallogocentric scenario, women's writing seemed to be contained and constricted in its ideational scope and span. Women's writing of this era problematized and prioritized the domestic space. This was a normative practice, even though women were not only exposed to Western culture at both epistemic and empirical levels, but were studying in schools and colleges and were often active participants in the nationalist movements. I will particularly try to focus on the anxieties of authorship of women writers and also focus on the career graph of two women writers, Rokeya Sultan and Swarna Kumari Devi, among others. I begin with a quote. "Oh, how I have burned to learn Latin, French, the arts, the sciences, anything rather than dog-trot way of sewing, teaching, writing copies, washing dishes every day. Why are not females permitted to study physics, divinity, astronomy, with their attendants, chemistry, botany, logic, mathematics?" And referring to the nurturance of female siblings in a family, this was the known diktat. You shall not learn, you shall not earn, you shall not own, you shall not. Such was the society's relationship of brother and sister for many centuries. Unquote. If the above statements had been made by Rashasundari Devi, Kailash Bashini Devi, Krishna Bhabini Devi, or even Rokeya Sakawat or Swarna Kumari Devi, it would have had the expected impact. But when these lines are extracts from a British text published in 1939 and written by the feminist writer Virginia Woolf as the third essay of her scathing satire on the British education system in 3 Guineas in 1939, matters seem to be far more complex in terms of confinement, engendered monolingualism, both locally and globally. I think it may not be out of place to juxtapose a comparative quantification. According to the literary critic Elaine Showalter, referred to by Tanya Chakraborty only a while back, in the 19th century, there were 200 women writers in mainland Britain. Interestingly, in British India too, there were almost 200 Bengali women writers, some well-known, others mostly minor writers, but among them mostly the Brahmo and Christian, and a small percentage of Hindu women writers could read English literature and write in English and even translate into English from the original Bengali texts. However, the eminent critic Ghulam Murshid gives us a more conservative figure of about 83 women writers in British India, many of whom were graduates from Calcutta University and had studied English honors at the undergraduate level. In part 2 of her book titled Grand Trunk Road in Mother India, Catherine Mayo, the American historian, referred to mostly illiterate Indian women who were brought up with the belief that their husbands were earthly gods and their reason to be born was to become wives and mothers. Mayo described in detail the imprisonment of women in zananas and pardas, the unhygienic conditions of the confinement of pregnant women, inadequate nourishment and childbirth assisted by untrained midwives of dais, which led to high incidence of maternal and infant mortality. This part of the book also referred to the plight of widows, widow remarriage, and marriage of widows if they were virgins. Education of women, even in the dawn of the 20th century, was limited, and here again, religious control of Hindu orthodoxy played an immense role. In the 10th chapter of this book, Catherine Mayo wrote, less than 2% of the women of British India are literate in the sense of being able to write a letter of a few simple phrases and read its answer in any language or dialect. That a century ago, literate women, save for a few rare stars, were practically unknown in India. And second, that the great body of the people, always heavily opposed to female education, still opposes it, and on religio-social grounds, unquote. Now, this is the gaze of the American imperial feminist historian, internalizing the colonizer's gaze. Mahatma Gandhi had dismissed her surmises as reports of a drain inspector, implying that Catherine Mayo's areas of specialization were swarages and gully pits. We need to remember in Strir Potro, Tagore's Mrinal had already written her resignation letter from family and patriarchal control in 1914, almost a decade before Catherine Mayo's sweeping generalizations about Indian women was published. The fear of educated women exposed to Western education and culture becoming defeminized and transforming themselves into a hybrid weirdo was common. As the translated poem, which I'm going to read, the popular 19th century poet Ishwar Chandra Gupta had written, I'm reading the translated version. In my grandmother's days, girls were so pure. They lived by the code and the rituals, to be sure. And then came Bethune and Anon. All these feminine virtues have gone, and gone with the wind is the woman demure, and jettisoning those old world charms, these modern girls with books in their arms must learn their A's, B's, and C's to speak like the Ferengis, and drive their own four in hand to visit the Maidan and listen to the band. Sooner or later, boots will adorn their figures, and who knows, they may even take to cigars, unquote. Partha Chatterjee referred to women, home, and familial responsibilities in the 19th century as sacrosanct, the home being an insular space that preserved national culture, and any invasion of its closely guarded practices was ridiculed as the negative influences of westernization that were commonly manifest in women's education, fashion, and food, such as tea drinking. Remember the movie Chokher Bali. It is indeed remarkable that women's lack of education or acquiring education was dependent on male preferences and priorities. We find that in Bengal in the 19th century, according to Ghulam Murshid again, the period, which is often referred to as the Bengal Renaissance, it was the men who desired women to acquire some skills in learning, enabling them thereby to play the role of companions. Companionate marriage was an ideal of the times amongst English-educated urban Bengali men, mostly Brahmos, some converted Christians, and a few elite Hindus. In the journal Tattvabodhini Potrika, administered by the Adi Brahmo Samaj of Debendranath Tagore, we find a distinction between what was considered to be feminine education and what led to masculine traits in women if they were exposed to education exclusive to masculinist domains. So in the essays Stri Shikha and Stri Shadhinata, we find a categorical statement. We are not against female education. However, we are against the kind of education now being given to women. The books women are asked to read are either translation from English or are English influenced. Consequently, our women become denationalized. We believe women should read only those books that will help them to become better wives and better mothers. This is an age of luxury. Most of the women are luxurious and indifferent to housekeeping and to the bringing up of their children. So education and home breaking were considered almost synonymous. It is indeed remarkable that women's lack of education or acquiring education was dependent on male preferences and priorities. It is also noteworthy, despite it all, that the first two women graduates of Calcutta University, Chandramukhi Bose, was Christian, and she was the first woman to have an MA degree in English from the same university. She became the principal of Beton College, the first woman to hold this position in India and perhaps South Asia. Kadumbini Basu Ganguly graduated in the same year. She was a Brahmo woman who after marriage went to England and trained as a doctor and practiced too, despite marriage and 5 children. Both were direct contemporaries of Rabindranath Tagore. That extraordinary career graphs that we can trace from the 19th and early 20th centuries, that some exceptional women in Bengal were their periods of transition from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, where the male writers and male public intellectuals were absolutely dominant and iconic. So who were the Bengali women writers during Tagore's time? We have become increasingly aware that Tagore's contemporaries require an exhaustive compendium that deal with their contribution to the evolution of Bengali culture. Though texts on Tagore's contemporaries do exist, that is male contemporaries, not many deal with aspects of gender and family and their impact and counter-impact on Tagore's discourse. In this connection, Rokeya Sakhawat Hussein's position as a younger contemporary of Tagore is significant, not only because she was a self-taught woman, but also belonged to the minority Muslim community, where opportunities for women's education was even more limited. In her memoir, Rokeya recalled that she had to observe Parda from the age of 5. She was introduced to basic English, Urdu, and Bengali education by her elder brother, Ibrahim Sabir, and her married sister, Karimunnisa. Born on 9th December 1880, Rokeya was 19 years younger to Tagore, but remarkably, both were born into distinguished zamindar households, and coincidentally, both were born when their respective families were experiencing severe financial constraints due to injudicious expenditures. Born in Rangpur, now in Bangladesh, Rokeya was self-educated. In 1896, at the age of 16, she was married to Syed Sakhawat, a 40-year-old talented and liberated widower who provided her with all the support she needed in order to nurture her creative skills. After the death of her husband in 1909, Rokeya set up a school for Muslim girls, Sakhawat Memorial Girls School. At first, the school was set up in Orissa, but due to strained relations with her stepdaughter, she moved to Calcutta and set up her school there. One wonders whether Rokeya's life would have been different if instead of being childless, she had been a widowed mother of minor children. Rokeya wielded a powerful pen and seemed to write more vociferously in Bengali about the exploitation of women than in English. Is this because she was aware that an English write-up could be easily noticed for subversion by the ruling British government, whereas a Bengali essay, though more strident, would not have the same far-reaching impact in terms of reaching the colonial masters? Of course, you know about the sedition law, which is still very much in practice in India right now in the 21st century. So this is how Rokeya argues and concludes her essay, which is called The Educational Ideals for the Modern Indian Girl. And she wrote, and it was published in the Musalman. She wrote, We should all, by all means, broaden the outlook of our girls and teach them to modernize themselves. Yet they should be made to realize that the domestic duties entrusted to them cover a task on which the welfare of the country depends. The future of India lies in its girls. The development of its educational system on proper lines is therefore a question of permanent importance. In another rather oft-cited Bengali essay, initially called Olonkar na Badge of Slavery, ornaments or badge of slavery. This was what Rokeya wrote, which she retitled again as The Degradation of Womankind. Here she wrote, "Woman readers, have you ever reflected on your pitiable plight? In this 20th century civilized world, who are we? Slaves. I have heard that slave trade has been banished from the world. But has our slavery been eradicated? No. And why are we slaves?" And in another essay in the Musalman also, Rokeya repeats this, her despair and her indignation. And she writes, "The worst crime that our brothers commit against us is to deprive us of education." Almost an echo of Virginia Woolf's Three Guineas. May we challenge such grandfathers, fathers, or uncles to show the authority on which they prevent their girls from acquiring education? Can they quote from the Holy Quran or Hadith any injunction prohibiting women from obtaining knowledge? And of course, this was quite a challenge to the establishment and to the religious institutions also. But that was the colonial period. And so somehow we do not know about Rokeya being trolled as she would have probably been in this period of digitization if she was alive now. Also, apart from the utopian novel Sultana's Dream, widely discussed, written originally in English, she wrote in Moti Chur, another of her essays that she wrote, and also her novel of that name. And there was allegations that it was almost a copy of Marie Corelli's novel, The Mother of Delcia. Here, Rokeya makes a very interesting remark about intertextuality. She says, "Then the question may arise, why such similarities happen between a British text and a Bengali one? Bengal, Punjab, Deccan, Bombay, England? How is it that from everywhere such effusive expressions emerge? In answer, we can venture to say that perhaps it is due to the spiritual unity of all the silent women of the British Empire, both women of the mainland and the colonies." She had later translated this novel into Bengali. Let us now turn to Tagore's own elder sister, Swarna Kumari Devi. She was born in 1856, that is 24 years before Rokeya. Swarna Kumari was self-taught, but had the exceptional advantage of being born in the distinguished Tagore family. As a matter of fact, both Rokeya and Swarna Kumari were daughters of educated men with significant economic power. But Rabindranath himself voluntarily discontinued institutionalized education. For Swarna Kumari, there was no such option. She was self-taught. Because she chose to learn, learning was not compulsory, as in the case of male members of the family. The interactions between the members of the Brahmo Samaj that she was exposed to within her family through her father Devendranath and her elder brothers Dijendranath, Satyendranath, and Jyotirindranath all contributed to fertilizing Swarna Kumari's inquisitive and intelligent mind. She was married in 1867 at the age of 12. Her husband, Janakinath Ghoshal, was a 27-year-old liberal man who did not discourage her from reading and writing. She was the mother of 4 children by the age of 18, that is by 1874. Her husband died in 1913. Swarna Kumari published her first novel at the age of 20 in 1876, and her last fictional publication was released in 1925. Swarna Kumari died at the age of 76 in the year 1932. Rokeya too died in 1932 at the age of 52. Though Swarna Kumari has left behind 6 volumes of her writings that include novels, plays, essays, short stories, she was the first woman writer to have produced a trilogy and has edited for almost 18 years the literary journal Bharati, in which she wrote copiously, including several essays on general science. Along with starting a women's association, Shokhi Shomiti, and becoming the first woman representative from Bengal in the Indian National Congress, she was the first woman to be awarded by Calcutta University the Jagat Medal, the 4th recipient, and the first woman recipient, the 3rd recipient being her younger brother, Rabindranath Tagore. Yet Swarna Kumari Devi's 150th birth anniversary in 2007 was scarcely noticed. The biographer of Tagore's definitive biography, Robi Jiboni, which runs into many volumes, records that Swarna Kumari Devi's literary ambitions were not very generously received by Rabindranath Tagore, her younger brother. So we have a letter that she wrote, that Rabindranath Tagore wrote to Swarna Kumari while he was in England, and she wanted him to promote his book, which she had translated into English, that is the novel Kahake. And Rabindranath wrote, "Your book reached me at the railway station on the day I was leaving for America." I will not read the entire letter. You can look it up later on. He said, "You just don't know how difficult it is to get any book published. Of course, if you are ready to pay, then no publisher will probably decline the book. But there is a demand from readers for a book which will also, for which you have to be absolutely sure about its success as a publication." And then he adds, "Moreover, the translation is not all that good. That is, it has not reached the high standards of English composition." This was the first letter that he wrote to Swarna Kumari. By 1914, Tagore had now received the Nobel Prize. And so in 1914, when Swarna Kumari once again sent her translations to England and also to his friend Rothenstein, this is what Tagore wrote to Rothenstein, referring to Swarna Kumari. "She's one of those unfortunate beings who has more ambition than abilities, but just enough talent to keep her mediocrity alive for a short period of time. Her weakness has been taken advantage of by some unscrupulous literary agents in London, and she had her stories translated and published. I have given her no encouragement, and I have not been successful, however, in making her see things in their proper light." Yet, in this context, we have to also note that Swarna Kumari's novel, Floral Garland, which was published in England in 1909, and thereafter again Kahake, which was published in 1907, and the novel was retitled as An Unfinished Song, and all these ran into several reprints by 1914, which merely proves the popularity of those novels. Interestingly, again, to conclude, I will allude to issues of gender, woman as creative writer and language, and that has been integral to this presentation, which I'm trying to make. I will now move over to a slide presentation to give you a more contextual perspective. But we need to also remember that in Kahake, Swarna Kumari had compared Shakespeare and George Eliot and also made the sort of indirect reference to the fact that George Eliot had to change her own name, that is from Mary Evans, she had to become George Eliot in order to publish her novels. So the male pseudonym was not something that not something that we can really not recognize as one of the requirements of the late 19th and middle part of the 19th century in Britain, the need for male pseudonyms for writers. Now, Swarnakumari's contribution to Bengali literature and culture, according to one of her eminent critics of the Tagore household, that is Chitra Dev, who wrote, except for Rabindranath, no one else in Tagore's family had written as much. Yet Swarnakumari has not yet been given her rightful place in the Bengali literary tradition. And yet with Bankim Chandra at one end and Rabindranath at the other, we can refer to Swarnakumari as the bridge between the two. Swarnakumari Devi and Rokeya Sakhawat's creative texts script narratives of resistance, not just in terms of their aesthetic content, but bear ample evidence of their being liberated themselves effectively, if not completely, from the social and cultural claustrophobia. In varying degrees, they proved their creative freedom and creative excellence, despite male control and phallogocentrism. Both the Brahmo and Muslim married women who became widows early in life were activist writers, editors, organizers of political forums for women, and proved that education was the liberating and enabling tool that widened their horizons. Though both these women writers were not known for their support of the imperialistic policies of the British colonial rule in India, their ability to read and write in the colonizer's tongue, the English language, empowered them to a significant extent as bilingual readers, writers, translators, and activists, thereby enabling them to traverse intellectually and linguistically beyond the cultural lines of control. Now I would like to move over to the slides, if I'm successful. So are you able to see the slides at all?
No, ma'am. Not
Yes,
yet,
no.
ma'am.
Not yet. Wait.
Not yet.
Let's see. Just a minute. Is Tanya there? Should I send it over to her, or I don't know what's happening?
Okay, ma'am. I will first call her. I think. Let me check.
Oh, just a minute. Just a minute.
Okay. Okay, ma'am.
Can you see now?
Not yet. Not yet, ma'am.
All right. No. Now?
Not yet.
That is the problem. I was so sure I'd be able to do it, but now it seems a little messy. All right, now probably.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. The screen is visible.
Can you see anything?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. The screen is
All
visible.
right. All right, thank you. Wait, but I can't see anything. Wait. Now?
Yes, ma'am. We can see
All
it.
right. All right. Oh, thank you. I'm so bad at all this technology.
Ma'am,
Can you
without
see
any
now?
help. Yes, yes, absolutely, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So British India means that it's a period of political and cultural colonization, social colonization, and women, of course, are colonized even within their domestic space. So the pioneers who really are male pioneers, it's not women who set women free, really. The pioneers were Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, as you know. One Ram Mohan Roy fought against the sati. Sati was abolished, and this was abolished in 1829. William Bentinck helped him, and I will not read all those parts because these are well known. Some of the well known signposts of Indian history of the British period. And Vidyasagar, of course, also introduced the practice of widow remarriage and worked against polygamy. This act was promulgated in 1856, and Vidyasagar did something really important. He cited Hindu scriptures to show that widow remarriage was well within the folds of Hinduism. And so Lord Canning helped him, and the Widow Remarriage Act throughout British India was enacted in 1856. We go to Gandhi, who was also a great supporter of women's liberation and women's active participation in the freedom movement, in the Satyagraha movement, non-cooperation movements. And Tagore, of course, being a creative writer, it is through his writings that he also gave a clarion call for women's liberation and thought that women should be free from Radhar Pore Khawa and Khawar Pore Radha. And so, look at this. We can only read our own tongue and write our own language. We who are in fact members not of the intelligentsia, but of the ignorancia. This is Virginia Woolf about women of the 19th century. And they were almost similar to the women of 19th century India, especially women of Bengal. And this is what I already read out to you, so I will not linger on this. And then we go on to what was this creative freedom? The first thing was freedom from mythical femininity. You know about the femininity in our myths, in our epics, the sort of voiceless, identityless female sex, whose biological sex and whose obedience was absolutely factored into translating as her only identity. And freedom from patriarchal femininity. Yes, the patriarchal control which comes through the two institutions of family and the institution of organized religion. Now, the first book, sometimes now being claimed as being the first Bengali novel, was written by a woman whose name we really don't know, but there are certain perceptions that it might be a Kamini Devi who might have written these stories. But this Monottama is credited as being the first book by a woman writer. But there is a lot of skepticism about it. It also could have been a male authored text. And this is really a sort of a wordplay on Bonkim's Tilottama in Durgesh Nandini. Monottama is not a word you will find in the dictionary. Despite my very limited knowledge of the dictionary, being a feminist, I have a very, very empathetic husband who helped me in going through the entire dictionary, and we could not find a monottama. So this is a neologism which was introduced by this particular author. Whether this author was Kamini Devi, whether the author was a male author, we are not quite sure. But this is an interesting text which has been discovered. But prior to that, the first fictional narrative written in Bengali was by a British missionary woman, Catherine Mullins, and she wrote Fulmoni and Korunar Bibaron. But it is a very subtle advertisement for the Christian religion and Christian practices, which are considered to be far more superior than the ethnic religions, the pagan religions, as they would have called it at that time. Now, Fulmoni o Korunar Bibaron is the Hannah Catherine Mullins's book. But at the same time, or around this time, the Bama Bodhini Potrika made waves in terms of advocating female education and also encouraging women to write, not only silent readers, but vocal writers. So the Bama Bodhini Potrika, this Shankolan is very important for women's studies, as Troy knows very well. And so Bama Bodhini Potrika, which probably made the housewives to venture into writing and read this with a lot of interest. But as in we find in even in 1792, Mary Wollstonecraft always thought that, well, education of women should also include their active participation in domesticity, that is to be good wives and good mothers. So from here, Bama Bodhini Potrika, which was a great encouragement for women's education, especially in Bengal, and also encouraging women to write creatively. And then comes Rasha Sundari Devi, already referred to by the Dean, and Amar Jiban. And we find that Tonika Sarkar, who really introduced this very slim, innocuous text to the entire world, she calls this book to be audacious. A book which calls itself My Life is a thundering audacity, she says. A woman who is so, look at her appearance. That is also an appearance which is more an inspired one, rather than, we do not really know whether there has been any surviving photograph, and if there has been, it is in such a state that this probably is the nearest visual documentation of what her appearance is like. So from here we move on to, at the same time, remember, you saw Rasha Sundari Devi, a Hindu woman married with, I think she gave birth to 10 or 12 children. Some of them died. And here is Torudat. And see the difference. Torudat, converted Christian, spent most of her life in England and also in France, but knew Sanskrit very well, not much of Bangla, but was really one of the stalwarts of Bengali women writers who wrote in so many languages. And also, I think a poem that we need to read very carefully when we read Torudat is the poem, The Lotus, where she rejects all the Western images of the most beautiful Garden of Eden and flowers like the lily and the rose, and celebrates the lotus as the queenliest flower that blows. This is such a fantastic image of decolonization by heralding the lotus as the queenliest flower instead of the rose or the primroses or any of the Western fauna. So the flora and the fauna of the West. She does not stay there, and she goes and celebrates the lotus. We move on to the two female graduates of Calcutta University, Chandramukhi Basu and Kadumbini Ganguly, and then to Rokeya, who set up this school, Sakawat Memorial School, an writer, activist, founder of the school. And this is a picture taken only a few years back by the Dean of Student Affairs, Tanya Chakraborty, at my insistence. She was very reluctant to do that, but ultimately she did get these pictures for me. And so this is the school as it stands today, but naturally it has been renovated a lot. This is the nameplate of the school and the school itself. And in Sultana's dream, which she wrote in English, this is what Rokeya had said, that she circulated an order, the queen, that all the women in her country should be educated. Accordingly, a number of girls' schools were founded and supported by the government. Education was spread far and wide among women, and early marriage also was stopped. No woman was to be allowed to marry before she was 21. I do not know whether we have been able to do that even now. I must tell you that before this change, we had been kept in strict parda. There were other Muslim women writers in Bengal during the colonial period. There was Nurun Nessa Khatun, there was Mamlukul Fatema Khanan, there was Karimunnisa Khanum Chaudharani. Bengali Muslim women's writing, which was very well known, was Sufia Kamal, of course, now in Bangladesh. And the journals that they published around this time had also pictures of Begum Rokeya on the front page. And there was a Begum Club also, which was founded in 1954. I do not know whether it still exists. And this is Swarna Kumari. And who were the other writers when Swarna Kumari was writing? There's Sarala Devi Chaudharani, Anurupa Devi, Nirupama Devi. I've just picked up only a few names. Otherwise, we would spend the whole day doing this. But these are the markers that we need to notice. And what were they writing? They wrote poems, short stories, essays, and novels. And these essays were often non-fictional writing. And many of these essays critiqued the condition of women in their times. And now, finally, the bridge between the colonial and the post-colonial, Ashapurna Devi. When Satyavati of Pratham Pratishruti leaves her home, this is almost a continuation of what Nora began in 1874 in Ibsen's Doll's House, Rabindranath in the Street Potro, and Pratham Pratishruti, Ashapurna Devi. This time it was a female writer. Ashapurna Devi, interestingly, was born 1 year later than Simone de Beauvoir. We know about Simone de Beauvoir, and as did Ashapurna Devi. Simone de Beauvoir, unfortunately, never knew about Ashapurna Devi, nor had read her, because translations were not available at that time. So we move on from Ashapurna Devi to another bridge. If Ashapurna wrote in Bangla, here was a woman, again a Bengali woman, who did not write in Bangla but chose to write in English because she grew up in Chennai, Madras at that time, Sarojini Naidu. Poet, writer, political activist, and see what she states. We want a new breed of men before India can be cleansed of a disease. I don't know whether there can be a more feminist statement than this one. And then this is what she says, talking about global solidarity. Men might be different from race to race, but women cannot be different. A common motherhood makes them alike. I never hope to hear an Indian woman say, I'm different from the white woman, the colored women, the native women. So talking about global sisterhood, global solidarity. And so women's rights, when they are recognized as human rights, only then I think we can think of a period of post-patriarchy and post-feminist struggle. But till then, are occasions when there are these phrases very popularly bandied around that this is the post-feminist era. The post-feminist era can only become a reality when there is post-patriarchy. So women's rights equal to human rights. I don't care, says Sarojini, what your religion is. You are women, and women were meant to lead the earth, and when women do that, the world will become good. Do not think only of yourselves, but fight for your rights because you are women. This was her speech in 1924 at the Indian Women's Association, Durban, South Africa. That is before India became independent. And finally, the very important last slide. Thank you, everyone, for your patient indulgence and time.
Thank you, ma'am. It was really good to listen to your lecture after a long time. And I was wondering, I mean, while going through the entire discourse that it was with clarity, everything, like women, how they broke the male bastion, and at the same time, this androcentric, this entire, the politics of androcentrism, how that was broken by them. And at the same time, I would also like to share, although ma'am was talking about all the Bengali women writers and you selected two of them, I just want to add, just I remembered, therefore wanted to mention it. That is, I was wondering about Radharani Devi. When you talked about pseudonym, that Swarna Kumari Devi, she talked about the comparison between Shakespeare and George Eliot, and that George Eliot, she had to take the pseudonym, that is male pseudonym, in order to contest, this kind of contest. She had to struggle to make a space of her own in this kind of, like the discourse of Jaino criticism and all that presents. So how Radharani Devi once, she wanted to attend the Sahitya Bashor, Robibare Sahitya Bashor, and she was not allowed there. Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, he mentioned that Robibare Sahitya Bashore Mohilader Probesh Nishiddho. So this kind of injunction, when I was going through this while reading about Radharani Devi, her poetry, the collection of poetry, and reading about her, it was really something like, after that, the relation between Radharani Devi and Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay remained the same, but she never entered into the Sahitya Bashor, and later on, with the pseudonym of Aparajita Devi, she started writing. And rest is history. We all know about that. So from this kind of subjugation to a more subversive stance, which the women writers down through the ages, they have been adopting this. And it is something more in terms of a revolutionary stance that women like Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, they adopted. So this is really like, it engages the readers as well as we the listeners. Each and every time, whenever we think of breaking the male bastion, whenever we think of the potrikas like Bharati, whenever we think of the organizations like Shokhi Somiti, there has always been the source of inspiration that this can be the archival material. And the more the Department of Women's Studies and the women-oriented researchers will come up, people will start thinking about the lost history, which has to be somehow like rediscovery. The rediscovery has to be made. And at the same time, in all the traditions, I mean, yes, this lecture is based on the women writers in Bengali women writers in British India. But whenever we talk about the other traditions also, we get several references where women every time they had to take the additional burden of, on one hand, managing the household, and on the other, irrespective of all the difficulties like Rasha Sundari Devi has done and the women writers have done. So that is highly inspirational, because in the 21st century, I mean, women are multitaskers and we have taken all the challenges. And even in the lockdown period, or in, this situation we are going through, each and every day we are reading in the newspaper the increasing amount of domestic violence and all that. And at the same time, I would also like to share that how the jokes are also coming up, how men are doing the household jobs. Okay, so this kind of situation, the contrary situation, or the kind of we can say the developments which has been happening in the society, that men have also come forward to join their hands. But at the same time, we should engage ourselves into more research, so that the lecture which you have delivered and the topics which have come out of that may engage. We could think of more questions which could answer women's discourse. So that is what I wanted to share with you, ma'am, and with the audience.
Thank you, Troy. I'm looking forward to you carrying this movement in terms of sensitizing students, in terms of making the students understand that male authored texts as well as female authored texts should be reread, so that we do not only read the lines but read between the lines, by discovering the evasive textual strategies that are so much a part of women's texts, and to see how far women have been able to write what they are thinking. That is such a challenge for women, because they are so nervous about not writing what they are thinking. Yes. Which, of course, as I began referring to the mad woman in the attic, I tried to sort of emphasize that, I think in 1995, there was a conference of about 75 women writers. It was called The Guarded Tongue. There, most of the women said that they were not writing what they were thinking because they were terrified. There was one woman whose husband twisted her wrist because he felt she was writing about what was happening in their home. You understand? So yes. In terms of violence, like, you will rarely find domestic violence very graphically and directly described. If it is generally the psychological violence. But physical violence and abuse of women, sexual assault of women within the homes are rarely represented in literature even to this day. Absolutely. You understand? So yes. We have to travel a long way. Yes. And I think because you are in women's studies, you have the additional advantage of always critiquing through the availability of documentation.
Yes.
And reading the representations to see whether the representations are eliding, transcending, or even destabilizing the normative practices.
Yes, absolutely, ma'am.
Great job.
Yes, definitely. I will be trying to do that. Yeah. Ma'am, it also reminds me of when you talked about this kind of domestic violence or the kind of aggression each and every time women have to face. It also reminded me of, although contemporary, like Mallika Sengupta's poems, where this kind of violence on women, yes, amply that has been, yes, absolutely. And when you talked about the twisting of the wrist, it also reminded me of Khona, how her tongue was cut off. Yeah. So down, yes, it is happening down through the ages. And somehow we have to challenge in our own ways, like activism each and every time, that is not possible. But the pen is mightier than the sword. In this way, we can at least think of a better alternative by engaging ourselves in the research. Yes, ma'am. That is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you, ma'am. Again, I just went back to those days.
I've taken up too much time anyway. I
No,
thought
ma'am,
I
it
should
was.
already finish in 45 minutes, but I don't know what I did. I'm
But
so
ma'am,
sorry.
somehow we are benefited out of this. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
And now I would like to request Dr. Dishari Roy, one of the faculty members of our department, to bring her observations out. Okay, over to you, Dishari.
Thank you, Dr. Troisina, for giving me this opportunity of conducting this question and answer session. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Lord, for your enthralling lecture. We were just spellbound when we were listening to your lecture on Bengali women writers in colonial India. The way you spoke about the career graph of Sokia Sakawat Hussain, Swarno Kumari Devi, Kadambini Ganguly, among others, is so exhaustive in terms of information. The reasons for which Rokia wrote on discrimination being faced by women during those times in in Bengali, and not in English, is so very well explained. And also the fact that usage of male pseudonyms in order to publish a book or a novel reflects the society's attitude towards women, the misogynist attitude. Your talk has been so very inspiring for all of us. Also, the fact that you highlighted, ma'am, the important role played by Rabindranath Tagore, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Gandhi, Raja Ram Mohan Roy with regard to women's liberation is splendidly examined and explained. It is evident from your talk that Bengali women writers really played a pivotal role in developing ideas of feminism in Bengal and all over India. Having said this, ma'am, I would now like to share one observation that has been shared by a senior professor of Department of History, Diamond Harbour Women's University, Professor Aparna Bandyopadhyay. Professor Bandyopadhyay has thanked you for your excellent talk, wonderful lecture, and she has commented that interestingly, while British women authors often adopted male pseudonyms, most Bengali women authors either wrote anonymously or adopted female pseudonyms. It is also interesting that some male authors use female pseudonyms. For instance, Sharat Chandra wrote with the name Anila Devi. And our students and other participants and audience have also thanked you for the excellent talk, ma'am.
Thank you, Nishari. It was a very good summing up. And also the question from Aparna Bandyopadhyay, who I also know personally, is of course a very important observation. And Sharat Chandra using the name Anila Devi, you know, there was also a feeling that it is only women who read novels. And in terms of marketing also, it was considered to be far more attractive that a man would not busy himself in writing these trivial things like a natok or a novel. You know, because this was a known phrase, natok novel pore shomoy noshto kora. So, therefore, this known tradition is probably what also led to the marketing of novels. And a novel written by a woman would seem to be far more confessional, far more true to life, which is why I understand that Sharat Chandra would have acquired that. Whereas again, I find that also very interesting, the observation that, well, women take on female pseudonyms. Once again, it's that very conservative idea about women writers in India, that is in Bengal, where women are a little, hesitant about taking male pseudonyms, unlike the British women, as we find also in the case of the Brontes. They used gender neutral pseudonyms. There was no way of knowing whether they were really women or men. So, this hesitation, this anxiety of authorship has been such a momentous cultural barricade for women. And the ability of them to keep on sort of pushing against these borders and boundaries has led to what we are doing today, has led to a women's studies department being started in universities in India. So it took a long time, but then we have done it. But we are just beginning. There's so much more to do. And I'm so glad that all these questions are coming in from the Diamond Harbor Women's University, yes, where we are prioritizing the gender role.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again on behalf of the Department of Women's Studies and also on behalf of our Diamond Harbor Women's University. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you, Dr. Sinha.
There is a question, should we, do we have time for that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, absolutely. Dishari, is there a question?
From
Yes, I'm just checking. Yes, there is a comment, I think, or a question from Agroni Roy. She has thanked you, ma'am, for your lecture, and she writes, as you told very rightly, that women were not there for rights of other women from time immortal. So, what should be the goal of feminism for a better future for women?
See, global goal becomes absolutely, a very complex, problematized question, because we cannot think gender in isolation. Gender is related to caste, class, education, religion, employment, all these factor in, which is why intersectionality becomes so important, and also location. So when we are thinking of global, we have to make comparisons with the local. It cannot be a very homogenized way in which feminism can move ahead. It has to be location specific. It has to be it is class specific. It is also specific in terms of opportunities available to women. The opportunities available to rural women in India and the opportunities available to even rural women in the first world countries is so different. There is a total disconnect. So I will not be able to really elaborate on this as a question, because it really calls for a seminar, which I hope Troy will organize someday.
Yes, ma'am. I will. I will try, ma'am.
And one more observation we have from Monami Dash. She has also thanked you, ma'am, for your insightful lecture. She writes that it not only charts the growth and struggle of women writers during British period, but brings out stalwarts like Tagore in new light, never expressed. Thank you again. And another question we have, this was an observation, ma'am, and the last question that has come up here is from Madhu Srivastav. She writes, even today, with the publication and phenomenal success of the Harry Potter series, we find the gender neutrality strategy working. Your observation, ma'am.
Well, again, as I said, if you look at it globally, there is always this thrust about gender neutrality, especially in terms of the LGBTQ movements being so successful. All the laws have been very supportive of alternative sexualities, and therefore what Harry Potter can do, I think it will take a long time for it to happen in terms of crossover fiction that is not really for children, not entirely for adults, but that crossover fiction segment where we can also have these gender neutral figures. And even if they are introduced, whether they will be recognized or not, I have some reservations about that. And then what is fascinating is the Bengali language itself, in terms of the language, is absolutely gender neutral. There is no she or he in Bangla. Yes. So in a way, the Bengali language was much more liberated before any of these movements happened. So we should really compliment ourselves.
Is there any other question, Dishari? Is there any other question?
No, I don't think.
Okay. In that case, I would like to request one of our faculty members, Momita Bishwas, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, Momita.
Yes, Troidi, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Troy Sinha, for giving me this opportunity. On behalf of the organizing committee of the lecture series conducted by the Department of Women's Studies, Diamond Harbour Women's University, we thank Professor Shangjukta Dasgupta for such an enlightening lecture. I will thank all the faculty members, students, and everyone in the audience who enriched the session with comments and observations. Such an effort was not possible because Such an effort was only possible because of the constant support from Honorable Vice Chancellor of Diamond Harbour Women's University. We express our earnest gratitude for her fascinating speech. We thank respected Registrar of Diamond Harbour Women's University for the support to conduct such an event and for his interesting speech. We express our gratitude to respected Dean of Arts, Professor Mondor, for his constant encouragement and illuminating speech. We thank Dr. Tanya Chakraborty, Dean of Students' Welfare, for her care, support, and the constant feedback. Her speech sparked interest among students and audience. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would especially thank Dr. Kopil Ghosh, Department of Geography, for the technical support to conduct the event. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would thank Dr. Troy Sinha for organizing the event to its finest detail. We would thank Professor Moitrey Vardhan Roy for her encouragement and suggestions. We thank Dr. Bishari Roy, Piyali Haldar, all the faculty members and staff of Diamond Harbour Women's University for the support and active involvement in the event. We hope that all the respected faculty members, audience, and our dear students will be present in the next lectures as well. Thank you for your support and participation. We express our very best regards to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Momita. Yes, ma'am. You first.
No, thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Momita. And I think that this is just the beginning because this is lecture 1. And ma'am, we always need your support so that we could carry on with this, and looking forward to meet again with this kind of lectures. So till then, stay safe. Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.